You? What did you think of the film? How would you characterize it?
I'd say it's artfully clever.
Dr. Paul?
I'd say there's a great deal of emotional depth to it. You can see it's been done by a woman.
Why do you think it's artfully clever, General Marshall?
Well, it's great anti-war propaganda. It's really quite effective anti-American military propaganda. It has the impact, much the same kind of impact that Dr. Strangelove has. But this is a documentary.
What did you think about the use of the music?
Oh, I think that's corrupt, because it's giving the American people the wrong idea of what their troops are like. The theme song is simply a song that has been used by American soldiers, by the paratrooper ever since World War II, to kid his own fate, to have
you
fun
mean
about
I'm
it.
not going to jump anymore?
That's right.
But what about
And glory, glory, what a hell of a way to die.
I don't know. That kind of impressed me, the Hallelujah song.
Well, frankly, I would see the other way around. It started out showing the raw troops of the land, trained but raw, inexperienced in Vietnam. The song, you kid yourself at the beginning. There it is. What a hell of a way to die. And then finally at the end, this is for real, man. We've been in combat. Here are the dead. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Sung the way it's sung when it's sung in church.
In your many trips to Vietnam, did you get the impression then, Dr. Paul, that the motivation is really a glory road, a crusade against communism?
If you speak to soldiers, and I did when I was there last summer, quite a bit, at one level you get the unsophisticated explanation which you saw in the young paratrooper. Yep, we're here to stop communism. But after all, you get this all the way through finally to Washington in the congressional hearings. Also, that finally this is where communism's got to be stopped, or it's going to be Thailand, or it's going to be the domino, or it's going to be Seattle. So the argument may be a little bit unsophisticated when a young paratrooper, a 19-year-old, says, we got to stop communism right here, but that's basically what apparently is policy.
On the other hand, it may not signify anything. The boy may have been caught short for an answer. He may have thought back to some of the stuff that he's read, and he just comes out with something that sounds sensible. Now, whether the entire army is indoctrinated in that fashion is another question, isn't it?
Well, what is the answer then? What would be the correct answer for a young paratrooper to give, let's say, the troop information education brief?
Well, he gave various answers. I mean, we heard various answers from various men, but they're just asking for a small mouthful, and so he thinks of the thing that comes most quickly to mind, but I don't think it's particularly significant.
Gentlemen, I had the feeling that we saw in that film two different types of American soldiers. One, the one we're most familiar with, the classic American soldier, the soldier that you were, that I was in the American Army, and a new kind of American soldier, I thought, General, and correct me if I'm wrong, the one who said, we're now trained killers. Remember that one? And the captain, who was having such a fine time admiring the effect of napalm bombing. That made me uneasy, but I wondered how characteristic is that?
Well, I didn't attach any significance to either one of these things for the reason that, where you say we are seeing a new kind of American soldier, I've seen these same types in every war since World War I.
I don't think that we ever, would you agree that we never preached it quite the same way? We didn't go around saying we were trained killers.
Look, I was a very young soldier at the end of World War II. Of course, I was in the French army, but I was American trained. My outfit looked like any American outfit on the line. And as you recall, in World War II, we didn't have to be preached. Nobody had to be preached. Hitler was a nasty so-and-so, and Tojo, remember the day of infamy. So you didn't have to have a particular personal and private rationale for fighting war because everybody was in it. But here, the Americans are by themselves. This is mainly, let's not kid ourselves, an American show. The Vietnamese are a sort of beautiful background for the whole war, as it comes quite clearly here. So they are not new. I think the American soldier is like the old soldier. You have a motivated soldier. You forget, these are professionals mostly.
In that way, I think General Marshall was what you referred to earlier. This is very clever anti-war and anti-American Army propaganda.
Yes, I think so. And I think so because of the way that the music was used. For example, where the scene of the hospital, the children suffering in the hospital, and the broken bodies of Vietnamese women and so on, and that's followed up quickly by the song again, Glory, Glory, what a hell of a way to die.
Didn't you think it extraordinary, gentlemen, that we saw American soldiers permitting cameramen to film a torture scene, and the captain exulting as he did on camera about his great bombing raid?
I think this is more a matter of the fact that cameras are now small, portable, and ubiquitous. But because you can hear this thing in any army. I was in the artillery, and when you hit a target, you were pretty hard to hit that you hit a target.
All through the Algerian War, we never got any pictures of French army torture.
The first thing was
You
surprising.
got an awful lot of books on it.
Your point about the torture scene. Yes, that was astonishing that an officer would stand there and let this thing be filmed. Or even let it go on, let's put it that way, if it was within his power to stop it. On the other hand, the thing about the man who's been on the bombing range who suddenly lets himself go, it makes him look like an evil thing, and yet this is a good type of officer, and it's perfectly natural. After you have been through a tremendous effort, you want to talk, you want to get it out of your system, see? And the fellow who talks it up is doing it partly for release.
But maybe we can talk now, both gentlemen, about the effects of what that captain was doing. How effective is our air war, First General Marshal? And then I'd like to come to you, Dr. Paul, about the people you've talked to who are on the ground underneath that raid. How effective is our air war? What chance is that type of weapon to help win the war?
You're talking especially about raiding into North Vietnam.
North and South, we bomb
Well,
both places.
I would guess that it's about 1/10 of 1% effective. It probably has the lowest effective rate of kill or of knocking out valuable targets in any war in which we've engaged.
Cost effectiveness?
Or cost effectiveness.
That's a McNamara phrase. Secretary McNamara, I think, would not agree with that estimate.
Obviously, from his recent statements, he does not agree with it. But he talks about the number of bombs dropped as a tonnage and doesn't go into the effect of that wastage of tonnage, and I would say that it's largely wasted.
Sir, do you have any idea of the order of importance, relative order of importance of the cost effectiveness of this air war in Vietnam as compared with Korea?
No, I have none, and I doubt that the great computer has it either. But it was relatively ineffective in North Korea after the first 6 months.
Operation
Because
Strangle.
they had tricks that just simply neutralized our bombing attack. And I'm quite confident that these same techniques have been taken over by the North Vietnamese. Why shouldn't they?
What would you think is the value of the argument that we should stop bombing the North as it's such a low-cost factor?
I don't go with that at all. I say that we're bombing on much too dainty a pattern, that we should go after more meaningful targets or else cut it out.
Yeah, but what are meaningful targets?
Power structure.
Physically speaking, with power plants.
Power plants and petroleum reserves.
Yeah, hold it. We're speaking of an army that doesn't use POL as we do, with petroleum oil lubricants. The North Vietnamese divisions of Dien Bien Phu had no trucks. They were going with human porters. There were 85,000 human porters backing them up. So to be without electricity in Hanoi may be a mild annoyance, or in Haiphong it may even be a bother because they operate in a port and you want to have cranes with power. But it doesn't really stop the war. It doesn't really hurt them, as like in Korea, when all of Korea was knocked out with Operation Strangle. North Korea, every piece of communication. I've just gone back rereading U.S. Air Force history of the Korean War. Well, the Koreans switched to human porters. It slows it down, to be sure. It makes it more difficult. But on the whole, you can sustain the kind of supply requirements with this thing. But let me say one thing about the picture, which I think did come through quite clearly. And that is, for the first time, you get a kind of reality of the war that you don't get in American TV. There's not one American TV film which shows that this is monsoon country. It rains half the time. The American soldier operates in the water. He sloshes around. His food gets wet. His clothes are musty. His shoes rot within 2 months, as was found out. There's a shortage of shoes, for example, or combat uniforms, because everything rots. Now, this film gets this smell, the smell of war, the feel of war across, like no other film so far, I think. This is something for which the American public, with which the American public should be acquainted.
General Marshall, would you like to answer Dr. Paul on his argument that the air warfare, even a much larger one, as you propose, would not be effective?
Well, in a sense, he's got a point. But anything that you can do to reduce the energy output of your antagonist in war is effective. And the idea that they're being more primitive, are not so heavily dependent on their power structure, I don't buy that, because they still need it. They need it to keep their economy going, etc.
General Marshall, we've, according to official statistics, lost 240 aircraft in Vietnam since February 7, 1965, when the bombing started. They're $3 million apiece. plus about something 140 pilots. Now, pilots, too, represent not only training potential, but human beings. If you remember that one aircraft carrier carries 85 aircraft, the United States has lost the complements of 3 aircraft carriers over North Vietnam. That's something to think about. For what effect? Yet, on the other hand, politically, there's a very strong chance that the escalation, somebody will say, well, Hanoi, we take out Hanoi, it hasn't done a thing. After all, the North Vietnamese fought the whole war against the French without Hanoi and without Haiphong. Then somebody says, well, we better bomb the passes leading from North Vietnam into China. This is going to be the next step, and I take bets on that. People say, well, we bombed the passes from North Vietnam into South Vietnam. That didn't do anything. We bombed the power structure.
Let me see if I
Then
can
where
get
we go from there?
the essence of General Marshall's thinking, because it was a two-pronged proposal you made. One is that we ought to at least do more than we're doing, or cut it out altogether.
Yes.
Would you explore that a little bit? Because I'm sure that when you say quit, you didn't mean we ought to just pull out of Vietnam.
No, I'm talking about ceasing the bombing of North Vietnam as being unproductive.
How would you see the conduct of the war as a military historian from here on in terms of winning it or forcing the enemy to come to some sort of terms that would keep what you would consider to be an honorable settlement there?
My feeling would be that it's possible for us to get the budge on them, to use an old Army term. That is, that we can get to the point where we're over the top of the hill and where the Viet Cong are back in the jungle, and we have recovered the use of the greater part of overland communications, at which point they, I think, would negotiate.
Do you think we can do that, sir, with the type of commitment that Secretary McNamara and the administration has put down up until now?
Type or size?
Type and size.
I think so, and I would say we could do it with another 100 to 150,000 men, because from now on we'll get a much larger proportion of combat force over there. This is the thing that is very deceiving about our buildup in Vietnam, that while we're talking about 210,000 bodies, we've got to think in terms of 33,000 or 35,000 weapons men, that's all. But as you go into another 100,000 troops, then you would get 60 to 70% of them weapons men.
Well, how do we meet, sir, the open-end commitment that the other side has taken? A year ago, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I am, there were 100,000 Americans roughly and 100,000 guerrillas. Now we have 200,000, and I believe they have 200,000. You propose another 150,000. Are they unable to match it?
They are not without limit. That's all I'm indicating. The time comes when in the build-up, if we proceed, they can no longer match us.
Yes, but I feel this is not going to be at the 150,000 man level that you propose, Slam, that because the North Vietnamese still have a 500,000 man army sitting in North Vietnam and 1 million man trained reserves. So if we put in another 150,000 men and they match us again, then we're simply back with a bigger war and the same stalemate. This is precisely, of course, what Secretary McNamara has been doing for the last 2 years, to say, well, if you put in another 30,000 men, this is going to be it. Another 50,000 men, that's going to be it. Another 100,000 men, that's going to be it. And finally, you land up with 2 to 37,000 guerrillas on one side, including 2 North Vietnamese divisions. And on the other side, you land up with a Vietnamese army, which just about is bottoming out both in strength and in ability to fight, and with an American commitment of 2 to 50,000 men almost by now, including naval forces. And everybody again saying another 100,000 Americans will do it. Well, the question is, yes, what happens if we get another 10 North Vietnamese divisions?
General Marshall, I know you have, from your many writings,